Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Evolution of Zelda, a series where we take a look at how the mainline console Zelda titles evolved over time. With one of the most pleasantly odd diversions in the Zelda franchise in the books, Nintendo looked toward the high seas for their next title. Well, eventually that is. Originally, Nintendo showed a demo for the game that largely resembled the feel of Ocarina of Time, but the developers became frustrated that the game would instead bank on the success of that title's formula rather than be its own innovative entity, a topic we focused on heavily in the last review. In an odd turn of events, the genesis of differentiating this title first centered around a fundamental change in graphics and art design. One of the most controversial points of the game and perhaps the entire franchise was the choice to go the cel-shaded route for Wind Waker. Not only did they use the cel-shaded format, but the game features many cartoonish aspects that the series had never even come close to at this point. This was originally met with a bit of backlash because of the more traditional demo that Nintendo showed off, but once the gameplay was shown off, critics began to simmer down a bit as the traditional Zelda gameplay was still intact. With that said, the gameplay isn't completely relevant if the tone of the art design throws you for a loop before you even pick up the controller. As I said in our first Zelda review, I believe what you see and hear before you even begin the game are key in creating a first impression. I'll come right out and say that I have no problem whatsoever with the art direction in Wind Waker. The game is designed like a whimsical cartoon, and this fits the tone of the game successfully. In fact, I would say this game is probably the most comedic of all the Zelda titles, thanks largely to the silly facial expressions. Just check out Link before the pirates catapult him in a barrel to the Forsaken Fortress. Or even better, look as he descends from the sea down toward the Kingdom of Hyrule below. He's like, oh shit, this boat just became a submarine. Wait, I can't breathe underwater? Or can I? Damn, this submarine thought of everything. Fucking love this boat. I could seriously dub over so many ridiculous things in this game, but that's part of the problem. While the game is lighthearted on the whole, there are critical moments in the game where the tone is ruined by the offbeat animation. Perhaps one of the best moments ever in a Zelda game comes at the climax when Ganondorf gives a monologue speaking of woes over the years and undying motivation. Then Link stares with an expression that looks more like mild constipation than courageous determination. In the grand scheme of things, it is a pretty small complaint. On the whole, I do think the art design fits the tone the game goes for, and while I'm pleased this over-the-top style never returned in another mainline console Zelda title, it works mostly well here. Whereas the art design is a point of contention amongst fans, I don't think there's any controversy when it comes to the music. Music in Zelda has always been a strong point, but Wind Waker adds a load of new themes to the mix that are just brilliant. I truly can't do it justice just by gushing about how much I love it. One of my favorite tracks of all time is a medley Nintendo did of Wind Waker's best tracks for Zelda's 25th anniversary. I'll leave a link to that track in the description for you to check out later, it's seriously phenomenal. Getting back on track, Wind Waker perhaps more than any other Zelda title needed strong music to rely on because of the untraditional nature of the overworld. You'll be spending more time in the overworld than ever before, and without strong music and visuals to carry the experience, you'd find yourself getting bored far too soon. But we'll get to that in more detail in a minute. Before doing so, let me briefly touch on the sound effects. Honestly, as we go on in this series, I continue to find myself with very little to say in this regard, only because the series reuses or retweaks its sounds consistently, and they're always done with excellence. That pattern continues in Wind Waker, and it complements the incredible soundtrack. Oh boy, where to start? Well, I suppose I should preface this section with an overall opinion and then give evidence as to my stance. I'll come out and admit that for the first time since Zelda II, I think Wind Waker is a game that leaves a lot to be desired. Zelda II's weaknesses lie in an overly punishing difficulty system and a grindy form of progression, but it's not a game that's light on content. In contrast, Wind Waker's problems for me largely stem from two main problems, a lack of content and that content being lackluster overall. Let's take these two complaints in turn. When I say lack of content, keep in mind that this is relative to the other games in the franchise. The development team from Wind Waker was adamant that they wanted to separate the game from Ocarina of Time. However, they decided a change in art style and a surface level makeover was enough to trick the player into there being a true distinction. I can't disagree more. Looking at the progression of Ocarina, what is your beginning objective? You obtain 3 spiritual stones through 3 dungeons and claim the Master Sword. What's your objective in Wind Waker? Claim 3 spiritual stones so you can live up to the Legend of the Hero of Time and obtain the Master Sword. And the progression in this game is done arguably worse. In Ocarina, you have 3 dungeons with a small diversion to Hyrule Castle to meet Zelda. In Wind Waker, you start on your island where your sister gets kidnapped and you run off in hot pursuit. You have a short stealth mission, quickly get a sail from an island for your boat after getting tossed out of your stealth mission, and then you have 2 dungeons. The 3rd dungeon isn't even a thing, though to be fair, whereas you obtain the Master Sword without a dungeon in Ocarina, you must go to the Tower of the Gods to get it in Wind Waker. Still, they have a similar amount of content to the point of retrieving the Master Sword, and the method of obtaining it is eerily similar. Then take the portion of the game after. In Ocarina, there are the forest, fire, water, shadow, and spirit secret temples, not to mention beneath the well in the ice cavern. You awaken sages so that you may hold back Ganondorf. In Wind Waker, you take the fight straight to Ganondorf, which laughably reuses the Forsaken Fortress dungeon without any of the stealth element. Then you get 2 temples instead of 5, though there are the pathetically short Fire and Ice Islands. Oh, and one of the worst fucking quests in any Zelda game ever, retrieving the Triforce of Courage. After traversing the 2 temples, you must retrieve these 8 scattered pieces of the Triforce of Courage to be granted access to Hyrule, a place you had no trouble accessing before, but now you need them for some reason. That aside, the quest is done by forcing you to go to 8 different locations and retrieve a chart. Then you have to decode the charts by paying this, oh god. I just realized I never touched on Tingle in my Majora's Mask review. For the love of Hylia, fuck this character. His entire motivation is to fit in with the fairy children. That's right, this middle-aged man is desperately seeking a way to live amongst the eternally youthful and has an obsession with the idea bordering on disturbing. Easily one of the most maniacal characters ever crafted in a Zelda game, and this bitch charges you over 3,000 fucking rupees to decode the Triforce charts. Once you pay this extortionist, you gotta go to 8 different locations and pull up the pieces yourself out of the frickin' ocean. It takes longer than both of the later temples combined and is one of the least rewarding pieces of bullshit ever put in a Zelda game. Have I ever mentioned my cardinal gaming sin? There is no worse crime a game can commit than being boring. A game's primary function is to entertain, so if it doesn't succeed in doing that, then where's the value? But there's one level beyond this that grinds my shit even more. Padding in a game. There's nothing fucking worse. Let me tell you why. Think of it this way. Let's say Wind Waker takes a player 20 hours to complete on average, and the Triforce Diversion takes up 4 of these hours. Let's say those 16 hours your average player would rate 9 out of 10. However, they would rate the Triforce waste of time a pitiful 2 out of 10. That immediately takes the game that would have stood for a 9 out of 10 at 16 hours down to a weighted average of 7.6 out of 10 at 20 hours. What I'm getting at is that adding worthless content to a game that is mandatory for its completion dilutes its overall greatness. There is nothing more frustrating to me than devaluing what's a great experience for the sole purpose of adding more length to the game. The saddest part is the whole Triforce fetch garbage was originally intended to be 2 whole temples, but they scrapped it due to time constraints and reused the assets in Twilight Princess. Think about this for a minute. Wind Waker was released less than 3 years after Majora's Mask, and this time, even though it clearly relied on the formula established previously in the series, it had all new assets. It clearly wasn't enough time. If they had given the game more time in the oven, it would have led to a much better product overall. Then perhaps Twilight Princess would have been pushed to a Wii-only title that could have been even better polished for that specific system. Then maybe Skyward Sword would have been an early-on Wii U exclusive that could have given that console more steam. Then ultimately Breath of the Wild could have been a Switch exclusive that would have had better performance on the superior hardware. Obviously, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, and this is speculation that operates under the assumption Nintendo wouldn't have committed an egregious mistake like cutting content and releasing a subpar experience again in the future, but my point remains. Their simple decision to cut content and rush this game out had a potential domino effect that had an impact on the rest of the franchise, all to get this game to the masses faster. And if you think this crap Triforce quest is the only thing I'm talking about, think again. This game's world design is pathetic. Rather than have a true open world, they made 49 glorified levels, so to speak, in the form of islands. Many of these islands are lifeless with little value whatsoever, while others are more bustling and have some side content. But for the most part, this is the most boring open world in the series since the NES games, and it's padded out by a massive ocean. Oh yeah, that's right, there's sailing in this game, and man is it beautiful. It's truly wonderful setting out on the high seas. At first. Let me repeat, at first. Eventually it gets real old having to travel from place to place via boat. Granted, you can use a fast travel mechanic, but it's a bit limited and unavailable until the halfway point of the game. Even more annoying is you have to constantly stop and use the Wind Waker to change the direction of the wind to have it at your sail's back. This was a huge mistake even Nintendo seemed to agree with, as they added the speed sail in the HD version that always has the wind at its back and lets you go faster. Now let's get to where the growing tedium of sailing can have a problem with the Triforce quest. The true problem with this Triforce quest outside of the obvious padding is because it's placed between the last dungeon and the climax of the game. It's so near the end of the game by this time you're tired of the sailing, and it farts away a lot of the tension that's built up to you facing off against Ganondorf. And to talk about the bosses, I'd argue that they're some of the more basic in the series as well as the dungeons. And the later dungeons constantly require to use a tedious Wind Waker song to guide a companion, and it's just not enjoyable at all for me. That said, the dungeons are still good for what they are, the boss fights do have some entertainment despite their simplicity, and the combat in the game is still fairly interesting. But I see this game heavily as an example of a missed opportunity on Nintendo's part. Perhaps I lost my rose-tinted glasses because I played Wind Waker on release and it was one of my favorite games of all time when I played it back in the day. But to me, after playing all the various Zelda games in quick succession, the weaknesses of this entry are just too glaring to ignore. With that said, please keep things in perspective. I wouldn't rate any of the Zelda titles under like a 7 or 8 out of 10 if you want to use arbitrary scoring. It's still an enjoyable game, it just hardly lives up to its predecessors or successors from my view in the gameplay and world design department. The story, however, still retains an enjoyable level of quality on par with the rest of the franchise. Whereas Majora's Mask told the tale of a young Link that was sent back in time after defeating Ganon, this game follows the timeline in which Ganon was sealed in the Sacred Realm after 7 years and what happened to the world after the Hero of Time was sent away. Inevitably, Ganon returned from the Sacred Realm, and with no Hero of Time to save them, Hyrule left their fate in the hands of the gods and was lost to the winds of time. You start on an island that tells the tale of this ancient Hero of Time and dresses their boys in traditional green garb worn by the hero when they come of age so that they may show the courage of the hero and slay evil. Our hero is left with little time to prove this isn't a myth as a massive bird drops a damsel in the forest atop his island. Upon saving this young pirate named Tetra, the bird steals his little sister instead, thinking it's the young pirate, and as such the pirate agrees to take Link along with them to retrieve her from Forsaken Fortress. However, there's been rumblings that the fortress, once a stronghold of small-time pirates, is now home to a horde of monsters. Finding the rumors to be true, Link valiantly sneaks his way up to his sister's cage, only to be cast aside by the bird at the behest of his master, Ganondorf. Fortunately, Link is retrieved by a mysterious talking boat, the King of Red Lions. The king asks the boy if he intends to take on Ganondorf and save his sister, and with the king confident of the boy's courage, he assists him in seeking out the spiritual stones. It's eventually revealed that the reasoning for obtaining these stones is to prove to the gods that although Link may not have the blood of the hero, he shares his courage unquestionably. Using the 3 stones, a tower of gods is summoned, and Link climbs to its summit and takes on a flying golem to prove his worth. This grants him access to the sea below, where the kingdom of Hyrule is revealed to have been resting. Obtaining the Master Sword, the only weapon that can truly stop Ganon, the flow of time seems to return to Hyrule. In returning to the sea above, you see Ganondorf in his fortress, but upon reaching him, it appears Ganondorf is one step ahead of you and is ensured the sword has lost its true power. Not only this, but breaking the seal on Hyrule returned his full magic, making disposing of Link little issue to him. With the situation looking grim, Tetra saves Link at the last minute, but in doing so reveals to Ganon that she is the reincarnation of Zelda and holds the Triforce of Wisdom. Yet again at the last minute, the young heroes are saved by Valu, one of the heavenly beasts you obtained a spiritual stone from. Returning to Hyrule in order to re-strategize, it's revealed in earnest that Tetra is indeed Zelda and that the King of Red Lions is actually the King of Hyrule. With the shocking revelations underfoot, Link must set out to awaken 2 sages and return the true power to the Master Sword. And as previously mentioned, obtain the Triforce of Courage through a fucking asinine quest, but we're not focusing on that here. With all the items, you head back to the kingdom below only to find Ganon has captured Zelda and you must scale his tower to save her. In doing so, you face off against a puppet of his design to prove your worth, and when you ultimately come to blows with him, you're defeated with ease. Extracting the Triforce from both heroes, Ganondorf finally lays eyes on the golden power, only to be beaten to the punch by the king. In a twist, the king wishes for Hyrule to be washed away for good, and the true battle with Ganondorf proceeds, ultimately ending in Ganondorf's true demise. With Ganondorf's fate set in stone, the young ones ask for the king to return with them, but rather he implores them to go above and create a new future for themselves, wishing the one wrought by Hyrule's mistakes to be lost a long time with himself. In a heartbreaking scene, the king is washed away with you safely returning above. At the end of it all, you get a happy reunion and shortly set off to find a new land above as the king had wished. In the end, Wind Waker is a mixed bag for me. While it retains the formula and seeming quality of the Zelda franchise, it does cut some corners in frustrating ways that are too harsh for me to ignore. The art design is quirky and fun, but not enough to set the game apart on its own. The sound design is killer, but not enough to redeem the game's weaknesses, which primarily stem from the game relying too heavily on the series' past formulas and not doing enough to set itself apart. I know that I praised A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time for perfecting previous formulas in the franchise, but in my mind it was this game's job to keep pushing the envelope in the series like Majora's Mask did, and instead it maintained the quality at best and at worst was a step backward in some ways. Still, it's an experience that can be enjoyed by many, and I most certainly recommend giving it a shot for yourself. I know my opinion on the game may be a bit polarizing, so if you're a big lover of Wind Waker, don't hesitate to tell me your thoughts in the comments. It's been a pleasure sharing my thoughts with you, and I look forward to discussing Twilight Princess with you next time. Be sure to follow me on Twitter for all the latest updates, and check me out on Twitch where I play the Zelda games and more live. Thank you all for watching, much love to you, and I will see you in the next video.